We'll be getting started in just another minute. And feel free to drop any questions in that chat window if you run into tech problems or need to communicate with the organizers here. And we'll get started shortly. We've got over 100 people joining us so far. It's fantastic to have all of you here. And let's launch in. We're really pleased to be joining everyone here today to talk about Fintech for the 50 plus and focusing on how to design for low to moderate income older adults. This is such an important but often neglected topic that I think is coming to be a little more top of mind these days. And so we're really hoping that the event today will help equip everyone to include these users in your financial health solutions, in your digital platforms, and kind of make those changes to be more inclusive. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Financial Health Network, our mission is to improve financial health for all. And we do that in a variety of ways through our network membership of companies that are working to improve financial health. We consult with companies and conduct research as well. And it's one of those research projects that we're going to be sharing with you today. We have a fantastic set of panelists joining us. I'm really pleased to be including them in the discussion. They'll be able to provide their expertise and kind of insights from on the ground working with older adults. And I'll introduce myself first. I'm Heidi Johnson. I am the Director of Behavioral Economics at the Financial Health Network. And I oversee our work to apply rigorous research findings from the academic study of behavioral economics to real-world applications and really implement those in companies where they can work to improve people's financial health. I also led the research study that we're going to be sharing some findings from with you today. And I'm really, really pleased to have Eliza Sir and Barbara Gary's joining me. So I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll launch in. So Eliza, please take it away.
There we go. Hi, it's nice to be able to join you today. My name's Eliza Sir. I'm the Director of Financial Security with the AARP Foundation, and we are the charitable affiliate of AARP, and we develop innovations and programs and services to meet the needs of vulnerable older adults. And so I lead a team of social entrepreneurs that is developing new solutions specifically focused on financial security, economic security, and financial resilience. And we are so pleased to be part of this work and to share more about what we've learned and insights that we can share with the field today.
So glad you could join us, Eliza. And Barbara. Seems like you might be on mute as well.
All right, there we go. So hello, I am Barbara Garys. I work at Champlain Housing Trust, which is a housing organization based out of Burlington, Vermont. I am the education manager there. I just celebrated my 15th year at CHT. And we do a lot of different education programs. All of it revolves around housing. We spend a lot of time in the financial capability sort of world because that really affects whatever type of housing people are interested in. And it's really so nice to be able to sort of be on a panel that goes across many different fields and lots of different intersecting kind of groups of people. So I'm really happy to be here today. So thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us, Barbara. Well, the way we're going to structure our discussion here today is first kind of ground everything in the research that the Financial Health Network recently did. So we'll share with you what we learned from talking directly with low to moderate income people who are ages 50 and older about reasons they're not using technology and ways that maybe we could better support that adoption and design to include them. We'll have Eliza share some information about her work at the AARP Foundation. Barbara will talk about the virtual home education that Champlain Housing Trust provides. And we'll spend the bulk of the time really focusing in on a discussion with these panelists about their experiences designing for an older population. And we're going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end today to field questions from you, from the audience. So make sure to be teeing those up, and when we get there, you'll be able to drop that into the question box and have Eliza and Barbara be responding to that and sharing with you their experiences. So to launch in, I wanted to thank first our sponsors of this event and of the research underlying it. AARP Foundation has been working in collaboration with Chase to support our research on fintech adoption for older adults, and we're incredibly grateful for their support. The Fintech Over 50 report is one that we released just a few weeks ago, quite recently, reflecting the research that we conducted with over 90 older adults, so people who were 50 and older, who were low to moderate income, all shared their experiences with us about their interactions with technology, the things that do and don't work for them, and paths forward that could really improve their experience. And so we share that in our report, which you can download here at the bit.ly link, Fintech Over 50, or you can access it on our website at finhealthnetwork.org. But we're going to be sharing with you kind of a preview of some of the findings today and give you a taste for what you'll find there. The reason we conducted this research is because of the imperative of improving financial health for older adults. And this is an incredibly large segment of people. 56 million people in the US are ages 50 and older and either low or moderate income. And so naturally, that's an incredibly diverse group. 56 million people includes many different kinds of people. In terms of age range, right, that's a really wide band, starting at 50 and up. Of course, representing all different demographic characteristics, as well as a range of experiences with technology. Some people who have been using technology in many aspects of their lives for a long time, others for whom it's newer, different attitudes, right? But we've been doing research on the financial health of this group and identified some kind of common themes of challenges that people are facing in terms of not being able to fully retire and having to work beyond the period in which they would have expected to, in terms of being inadequately prepared to protect against medical shocks. And many other features like that are contributing to the financial health challenges that we're seeing. So while around, a little over half of people in this segment are what we would classify as financially coping, which means they have a few different areas of challenge in their financial lives, but also some opportunities and areas of resilience. More than 1 in 4 are really struggling and are financially vulnerable. And we know that's something that technology can help with, right? There's so many different platforms and tools and services out there that are, accessible online, that offer convenience and security and all kinds of benefits to people as they attempt to improve their financial health. But that often isn't getting accessed by this group. And, we find there's really interesting questions here because it's not always an issue of access. So we know that smartphone use is really widespread. The vast majority of people over 50 have a smartphone. And not only that, but they use it daily. 94% are using their smartphone every day. So it's not a matter of not having the connection to these technology products. However, only 37% have reported in AARP research is finding that they use their smartphone for banking or digital transactions or other financial needs. So that's a big gap and kind of calls out the question of what's getting in the way. And that was the driver for our research, to try to answer that question, identify those barriers, and see if we can overcome them. Those questions have become all the more urgent during the COVID-19 crisis, right? Because older adults face worse health outcomes, so there's greater risk to them of conducting, their in-person or, paper-based financial management system. The digital divide is going to be harder for them to bridge. And so all of that has become really important all of a sudden to figure out ways to overcome. But we're seeing a lot of bright spots as well. So technology adoption is way up. Engagement with online banking seems to be increasing. There's really that imperative to try it out. And so the question then becomes, how do we support that new adoption in a way that leads to lasting, long-term, positive relationships with the older customers, and isn't just a flash in the pan? So in our research, I wanted to share with you the kind of main barriers and opportunities that we identified. The 4 of them are listed here. The first is to empower users. So many of the participants in the research we conducted described technology as something that was kind of being forced on them, either by younger family members who were encouraging them to adopt technologies that they weren't interested in. Maybe they were required at work, or sometimes they felt like it was an inevitability and wasn't going to be a choice for them much longer, rather than being something that they could affirmatively choose to invite into their lives or not. So empowering users will go a long way towards overcoming that kind of negative association. Putting users in control is the next one. For many people, Fintech, which we're defining pretty broadly as kind of any financial management service or tool or platform, it's convenient and it's fast. And those are aspects that are just not as appealing for a group of people who very often are watching every dollar pretty carefully, have their existing systems, and it feels kind of risky to hand that over to an app or an algorithm or a company they don't know, right? And so maintaining a sense of being in control and kind of emphasizing those aspects can really help people to actually be interested in using those products. The next is to eliminate stigmas. And, you know, there's a lot of negative stereotypes out there about older adults and their use of technology, many of which they have internalized, regardless of their actual level of skill or usage, right? So many participants told us, you know, I'm not a tech person, I'm not tech savvy. And then in the next breath, would tell Alexa to turn down the volume. So there's kind of that incongruence between what people were actually doing with technology and how they interpreted it themselves. And I think they see that reflected in a lot of the platforms out there that are not really considering them as likely users, even if they could benefit from a given financial health digital platform. The last opportunity here is to foster connections. We frequently heard about the importance of family, of community, friends, and how that was so much more valuable to the older adults we spoke to than digital connections. At the same time, a lot of technology can really help to foster those connections and to build them up rather than break them down. And so leveraging that is really a great opportunity to kind of reflect back the values of these older users and show them that you're a part of what they're interested in and the things they want to build towards in their life. So each of these opportunities underlines some more specific design recommendations that we developed, where we kind of tested those out with older customers, got their feedback on what worked for them and what would be interesting and help them overcome these barriers. We did that across 4 different stages of their kind of experience as a customer in adopting technology. So starting with discovery, when they would first hear about a product, the onboarding phase, when they're trying it out for the first time, navigation and learning their way around a new interface, into ongoing use and kind of a more routine set of interactions with the platform. So I'm going to preview for you pretty quickly just a few of these, a little snapshot of what you can find more of in the report. But the first here in the discovery phase is to think about harnessing the power of online communities. It was really striking how many older adults are doing their due diligence. They're doing research online to learn about companies, and they're looking at multiple sources to validate the information that they're getting. And so providing information about your solution in places other than just on your website, but places people can find it online, on social media, on review sites, they're going to be checking and they'll want to see descriptions of what's available to them elsewhere. It's also important to include information from older users themselves on review sites and other ways people would access that information. Going back to the point of people being able to see themselves reflected as valued users would help give the confidence that this solution is something that has them in mind. And then lastly, to allow for pre-adoption exploration. This is a little different from the idea of a free trial, which many older adults are kind of skeptical of. That sounds like maybe a little bit of a bait and switch, right? But if there's something that they can try out to get a feel for what it is that this service offers me, what I can get out of it, what's it going to look like? That can really help to boost confidence and engagement and interest before having to take the step of really committing. Next up in the onboarding phase, we recommend being really attentive to how you're treating personal information. Older adults are very frequently the target of scams and frauds, and they know that. And they are really diligent about making sure they're not giving away their personal information when it's not the right thing to do. So you're going to really scare off a lot of people if upfront in onboarding you're asking for personal information. This is, I think, probably a best practice for many, many users, but is a particular area of sensitivity for older adults. And ways to go, to kind of work around that include being really clear about why you're collecting personal information. So in the moment, as you request it, share back what it's for and what you're going to do with it. We also recommend not jumping into that too soon. If people can start with low-risk first steps, if there's some way they can engage with your product or service before providing that personal or more sensitive information, that's just going to build trust, right? And get them to the point where they're not abandoning that product because of discomfort with what you're requesting. In the navigation phase, we heard a lot of interest in tutorials. This is kind of common that there's tutorials for new platforms, but a lot of people told us I couldn't find it again. I went back to look for that information and it had disappeared. And now, there's a lot of interest in using learning materials and providing those references so that people can learn. Even if new technology is not something that they're innately familiar with, the people we spoke with were really eager to have those resources so that they could build their own skills. So things like, for example, a key of icons. People told us, I don't know necessarily what the new icons are when I see them, but if you just tell me what it is, I can learn it, right? And that applies to a lot of different elements of an interface. Make them easy to find again so people can refer back to them when they run into questions. And then reintroduce tutorials when you have a software update. Software updates feel really disruptive to people who are concerned about having to continuously relearn a platform. So if you're providing that resource at the time of the software update to walk through any changes, that kind of mitigates these concerns that, a user is going to be left out high and dry to figure it out on their own. Instead, you're there to support them and provide what they need to get up to speed. So lastly, I'll just end with one of our recommendations in the use category. Confirmations were a real source of comfort to people who often operated with, paper receipts, kept careful records. Taking those analog systems online was really valuable to kind of know that some kind of loop has been closed. So certainly, before executing a financial transaction, putting that user in control and double checking is important, but also all of the subsequent steps. So think about making a bill payment in person, right? You're handing over the funds, you're getting a receipt that confirms that it had been received. Each of those steps you have a record for, and that should be similar electronically. We also recommend integrating with people's, existing systems of managing their finances, which often includes paper. So making it easy to print either those confirmations or any other kind of important information like a dashboard view of someone's finances, having that be available on paper and kind of quickly able to execute that really shows that you're thinking about the needs of that user and that you're there for them to kind of provide those resources. So that's just kind of a quick sampling, 4 of the 13 different design recommendations that we provide in the report. I encourage you to check out some more details that you can find in there. But now I'm really pleased to hand it over to our panel to share kind of in their experience designing for an older population, what that has looked like for them and what they've done. So I'll start off with Eliza to take it away.
Thanks, Heidi. And I was nodding at everything that you were saying, because I think what's been really validating about this research is that there is so much alignment with what we've been learning over the past several years at AARP Foundation, as we've really embarked on this commitment to developing solutions that are both high tech and high touch. So at AARP Foundation, we are a national organization. We have a commitment to serving all low-income older adults, and we need to do that in a way that is both scalable and sustainable, and at the same time has the impact that we seek to achieve. So what is really critical to, and is a design principle for each of our programs, is that we're able to actually measure the impact of our programs, measure those outcomes. And what we're focused on right now, specifically in our financial security work, is being able to measure short-term savings behaviors and behaviors that we see as a step towards longer-term financial security. And so that it's difficult and it's complicated, and it is takes more than just providing somebody with an app or a tool. Last year, we launched 2 Fintech programs, so I'll dig into a little bit what that took. We launched these 2 Fintech programs. One is called My Savings Jar, and the other one is called Self Saver. And My Savings Jar is a savings program. It's a community dashboard, and it's designed to help people that are living on a tight budget to develop that short-term savings behavior and working towards longer-term financial sustainability. I'll talk a little bit about later how that has adapted in the COVID-19 environment and how we're showing up and meeting our customers where they are. And then Self Saver, similarly, is designed to help people to manage their cash flow if they are self-employed or contracting. And that came from research that we were doing and insights that we were getting from the field, that there were so many more older adults that were cash constrained, that were either struggling to get back into the workforce, trying to pursue another passion, or branching out on their own so that they could earn some additional income, and that they needed some additional support around cash flow and taxes specifically. So you can go to the next slide. We have 2 incredible products now, but we didn't start there, and it was a long process. And so I wanted to start by just sharing that this came from talking to people, really sitting down, conducting customer discovery interviews, hearing from people, looking at the research both from AARP Foundation, and our colleagues, and developing a set of assumptions for each of those new programs or products that we seek to launch. And when we talk about, even when we're talking about technology products, at AARP Foundation, we actually think about those as programs, because it's more holistic, that it's not just providing somebody with a product or a tool. That image that you see on your left is our Assumptionator, and that is a tool to allow us to identify what are those assumptions that must be true or that we must solve for in order for this solution to be effective. So whether it's something that's technology-driven, community-driven, it's always going to be important to drill down into those assumptions. And those in the far right, upper right-hand corner are those that we have to test. So we have to go out to market. We can't answer those questions just by asking up somebody or looking at the research. So then on the right-hand side, what you see is some of our initial testing. And this was specifically for, before we had Self Saver, we were trying to test out this freelance concept, this independent contractor concept. And so we actually developed what we call a smoke test. So it was a website, a landing page, where we were testing several critical assumptions. And when we were thinking about designing for low to moderate income older adults, really 2 most important things coming up for us were, 1, would people link their bank accounts? Is this, and you talked about this, Heidi, people are used to being taken advantage of. They are resource constrained. Can we actually make the value proposition clear enough that somebody's going to link their bank account so that they can have that product, service? And then the other piece is, did they see the value proposition? Did it meet their specific needs? and was there enough demand there? And so we go through this exercise anytime that we're developing a new program or product or service in market. And we often do this in collaboration with partners. Some of those partners are financial technology companies. Some of those partners operate in communities. And having those community level champions that can connect us is critical as well. You can go to the next slide. This is where we are today with my savings jar, and we are incredibly proud of how far this program has come. And what I wanted to mention is that it's an ongoing process of iteration. And so if I can advocate for one thing, for if you are designing a program or product for this audience, for low to moderate income older adults, making sure that you're taking the time to go through a journey mapping process. And so this landing page that you see today has been very intentional. We've been very intentional about what is the language that we're using to talk to people about the program that we're offering. How are we showing the right images so that we're showing up and people are seeing themselves reflected here? It's interesting, actually, when COVID first hit and we were wrestling with how to adapt in this environment, we played around with changing some of this language because we wanted to make sure that we were meeting people where they were. And one of the challenges that we found was actually that being too focused on the crisis was actually deterring people. And people were looking for support. People were looking for a sense of stability, that knowing that they were going to have the resources that they needed and through a trusted source. And so we went back and we said, okay, how do we need to tweak that language further so that we're being intentional about acknowledging where people are right now, but we're not heightening that fear, that sense of crisis. And yeah, I know we'll dig in more, so I'm looking forward to hearing some of the questions that you have.
Thanks, Eliza. I think that process you're describing of, testing with your target audience and getting their feedback, making changes, is incredibly valuable. And I think we'll want to hear a little bit more about that later as well. Barbara, I'll turn it over to you to share with us your experience with virtual home education.
Great. So if you want to go to the next slide, just to talk a little bit. So Champlain Housing Trust pretty much does all things housing. We do rental housing and we have co-ops. We have a specialized program with a down payment grant. We help people buy on the open market, and we want to help people stay in their homes after they buy. So we kind of do the full gamut of housing, and underlying pretty much all housing really is financial acumen and stability. And so we serve a pretty big geographical area in Vermont. We have the largest, county, and we have the smallest county in our service area. And geographically, we are spread quite a bit. So if you want to move forward. Yeah. There we go. So our education program kind of encompasses a little bit of everything. We kind of believe that financial capability is like the foundation for all housing. Being able to know what comes in and what goes out and how well you're able to handle all those debts and expenses. How can you handle unexpected things? We do programs for home purchase as well as homeowner services. Our rental, if you want to click once more, I think the rental arrow pops up. We do some rental programs, but most of those kind of fall in that financial capability world. So we were fortunate that a couple of years ago, we actually got a grant to create a new program. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the CAMP program. So we were kind of lucky that pre-COVID, we were already thinking about financial technology and really trying to incorporate using more financial technology in our different programs that support all the different housing. So we came up with a program, we called it Conversations About Money because we thought that was hip and cool. And it really was geared to serve our existing homeowners who were using our program where they're one of our portfolio homes where we've helped put a grant in them. So we have kind of a long-term commitment to these homes and homeowners. And so we were really motivated to create a program that was amazing to do, engaging and rewarding, and the outcomes were really there. So the next slide will show you a little bit about who came in and why. So when we created the camp program, we were doing some financial coaching, that sort of one-on-one. Most of that was in person. Sometimes it was virtual. We tried to make sure that we were getting a lot of information. Eliza, mentioned earlier, gathering information and trying to do some things as we went along. We did some focus groups, and we sort of tried to use a lot of different ways to do that. We also wanted to make sure that we included choice, so kind of empowering users sort of came in here, that we didn't want to force people into using technology if they really didn't want to. So our group classes that we offered, we did some in person, and then we did indeed do some webinars. We had some resources that included things, books, actual books that we could loan out, but also online resources that we had available. We wanted to see if we could engage people on a monthly basis by using texting. And then lastly, we had a match savings. So it was a pretty robust program. We were really trying to engage people on many different levels over the course of a whole year. So we had the ability to enroll up to 50 households. We enrolled 48 who engaged really actively with the program. It wasn't specifically geared for folks who are older, but we did find that the mean age was right around that 50-ish mark. We had more folks in the older demographic than the younger. A couple other findings, or sort of telltale things about our group. There was a high level of single women. It was predominantly women who participated. Still not exactly sure why that was, but that was something that we really wanted to take into account, because you need to speak to your audience. And of course, someone's calling me. We also found it was an incredibly educated group of people. So I'm sorry, 2 seconds, I beg. Well, the timing for that was terrible, and I am sorry. I didn't want the machine to go off. So in knowing that we had a predominantly group of women, highly educated women who were mostly employed and older, we wanted to make sure that as we were creating the program, that we were really creating something that spoke and could engage people at a lot of different levels. So if you want to go forward one. So thinking about focusing on those technological pieces, we had introduced using webinars. Most of our folks hadn't really engaged using webinars that often. We thought we'd try texting and seeing about just engaging a little bit more organically, how people engage with friends and family. We thought that was something we wanted to explore and look into. And the match savings for us was a big key. When we had decided to run this program, we realized that a lot of people were deferring maintenance on their homes because they just didn't have the money to do it. And so as folks were getting older and homes were becoming more in need of repair and upkeep, people were actually less able to take care of those expenses. So we really wanted to try and create a focus on encouraging people to save. So we were able to partner with North Country Federal Credit Union, which is a small and local credit union, because again, engaging people into online banking, which is pretty much what this was something new for most of our folks. So we were able to incentivize that, fortunately, by having a match savings program. And so when we were trying to engage people, those 4 things that Heidi mentioned really kind of connected here. We wanted to make sure that our participants had a lot of choice, but we also wanted to really encourage them to be willing to take on and try on something that maybe they hadn't done before. So really trying to give them a menu of options from which they could choose, and trying to make those really comfortable. I like analogies. So it's sort of like when someone gives you something to eat, you kind of want to know what was in there before you sort of take that taste of it. And that's really one of the things we wanted to do. We created handouts, and we created some online resources, sort of how to. We had a lot of screenshots that we used, so people would be able to see when you log in to North Country, this is what it's going to look like. And here's an arrow to show you, here's where you're going to click. When we were doing our webinars, we were fortunate we have an AmeriCorps member who serves with us, and she was able to make herself available to actually do practice Zoom or go to meeting with people. So before we even did webinars, we had individual appointments where she could kind of set up a practice webinar and let people sign in and walk through. And again, we tried to use a lot of handouts and resources to show people, here's how you use the different features. And each webinar, when we did one, we would remind people that all of our PowerPoints, about the first 3 or 4 slides, were just remember, hey, here's how you raise your hand, here's the chat box, just so that as we went through, people didn't need to feel uncomfortable asking questions because they were comfortable knowing that we were happy to give them information. We started out by saying, you know what, everything is new. I tell people I'm not technologically savvy myself. And so it's okay to ask questions. It's okay if you need to try something a few times before you actually get it. And the biggest thing that we found is that organically, the connections really started happening where one person in a webinar or on a call, or when we did some in-person things, would say, oh, you know, I struggled with that too, but here's what I did, or, oh, it's okay, you can get through that. And one woman who was really like, I don't know if I can do these webinars, one of the other participants invited her to her house because they only lived like 3 blocks away from each other. They actually went over to each other's houses. So the first time she did it, she actually sat with someone who had done the webinar before. So it really was creating this culture of a community where people were willing to step out of their comfort zone that little bit. People were willing to take on some new things. And what we found sort of at the end of the program, it was a year-long grant and a year-long program, is that we had an incredible percentage of engagement. We were expecting 20 to 30% of the people to drop out as we went along. We finished 97% of the people who started, and one person moved out of the area, and that's why she left. So really, apparently, we were able to figure out what we were doing was working for people because it kept them engaged. And in fact, when the program ended, we call them our camp alumni, they actually kind of created some smaller groups on their own to just keep things going. And we're now creating a Facebook chat page for our camp alum to be able to stay connected and involved and continue to go forward. We also reported a lot of people definitely reporting they definitely felt more in control of their finances, in control of their savings. A lot of our folks were so successful in that match savings program. We were able, again, to help onboard them in a way that felt comfortable. We also brought in a representative from the bank, from the credit union itself. So there was a face. So we had like our personal representative. So if they had an issue, they had a guy to go to. It wasn't just some faceless, interaction. And what we found are that in a year's time, our folks who were below 80% of the median income saved $20,000 over the course of the year through that match savings. That's before the match happened. So many of these people were able to actually finally have a nest egg where they could feel comfortable. And many of them, actually we had 13 of the households actually came in, accessed our revolving loan fund, and were able to use some of their own money as well as some other community resources to do some of those repairs and really put themselves in a better housing situation, which also put them in a better financial situation. So really thinking about how do all of these key pieces go together. And I don't think we have to move all to one way or the other, but I certainly know that having had this premise of the platform for camp, now as we've moved into COVID-19 and we've had to move all of our other programs to be virtual, our rental programs, our financial capability, our home purchase, and those serve people of all ages. Really being able to be thoughtful and mindful about how we were building some of those programs was really laid on the foundation of what we learned through the camp program and some of the technologies that we engaged in with that program. So it actually made it a bit easier for us to step forward in the COVID-19 world, having had some of that background. I think there's one more slide.
Yeah. I think we're getting a lot of questions here on the chat, which is fantastic, and I want to make sure to save time for those. So we're going to launch into the panel discussion. We'll keep that pretty quick. There's a few that I wanted to make sure to get each of these panels input on, and then we'll be able to launch into what we're hearing from the audience. First, Barbara, let's go down on what you were discussing related to adaptations around COVID-19. so many different service providers have had to adapt to this current environment. And I think, you know, both of your organizations were well positioned to tackle that given the work that you've been doing already. But even among those who were prepared, you know, obviously there are adaptations and changes that have had to be made. So could I ask each of you to kind of address that briefly? How has your kind of engagement with older adults evolved, and any best practices or lessons learned that you could share from that? Eliza, do you want to start first?
Oh, sorry. I thought Barbara was jumping in on that. Yes, I'm happy to. So when I mentioned this, I think briefly, what we found pretty quickly when COVID broke out is that people were being just flooded with content and information and resources, particularly through emails and online resources, and having trouble navigating, finding what they could really trust. And so one of the ways that we actually were really intentional about our engagement was taking time to pause and come forward, not just with doing something, but really being intentional about what our programs were positioned to be able to do. And so in the case of Self Saver, that was, we actually pivoted away from, you need to make sure that you're withholding on your taxes, pulling money out of your bank account, because we knew that people needed that money in the short term, that was going to be really critical. And instead pivoted to thinking about these longer term, how to disaster proof your business. And then in the short term, how can you access funding for your business? How can you apply for the PPP or the other assistance that may be available in your state? And we're fortunate through AARP's network that we have channels where we're able to push that information out. And so one of the most effective ways that we found we were able to get that information out was not only through our own site, but through social media. And so leveraging our state offices and having them push that out through Twitter and through Facebook was highly effective when it was meeting people where they were in that moment, and being making sure that we didn't come off as pushing something just because we did it already, that they may not need right there. Similarly, with my savings jar, of course, we are providing a support for people to build up their savings, but in a moment when saving may be really difficult for folks that are getting laid off and are struggling to put food on the table, we focused more on the resource side and navigation of resources. And what we were seeing was that the number one support that people needed was really around food. And that, I think, was a good reminder for us. We talk about this all the time, but the holistic nature of the work that we do, that it's not just about financial resilience, but that it connects to our food security work, our social isolation work. I could talk a lot about that, but we don't have too much time. So I want to hear what Barbara shares as well.
I think those are great kind of lessons learned around tailoring the content to be responsive to what people are experiencing. Yeah, Barbara, how about you? You started telling us a little bit about shifting even more online. What has that looked like?
Yeah, I think the nice part was some of the lessons that we learned are that you can't just take what was in-person curriculum and just do it over the web and have it be the same, because it's not. And so I think that helped us actually be able to take our in-person curriculum and make it, adapt it to actually be effective, to be engaging online as well as we do in person. So I think that helped us quite a bit. I also think too, just the fact that we were a bit more familiar, we were able to kind of turn things more quickly. Like I said, some of our rental programs and our eviction prevention programs, especially, we wanted to move as quickly. But it was also looking to see, like, a couple of our programs we realized really couldn't be done particularly well in a virtual way. And so we really had to be thoughtful about what really made sense and that what really didn't, and what would be our way to compensate for that. And I think too, trying to make sure, like, for example, in the past when people didn't have access to like the internet, maybe in their home, we could say, oh, you can go to the library and you could access it there. Well, now they can't. So I have to give CHT some credit that in some of the newer buildings, because connectivity tends to be an issue for us here in Vermont, actually putting Wi-Fi in some of the new buildings that we're building, so there's at least a basic connection for anybody who wants it, and anybody who's in that building who needs actual internet access on a higher level, they can get their own, but at least there's a minimum access. And so I think as an agency trying to think in the bigger picture about how we can make sure that people can have that access was important.
Absolutely critical. We're getting some great questions from the audience, so I'll just ask one final one to the panel before we turn over to what we're hearing from others. I think it's really important to think about myth busting when we're designing for this population. We talked earlier about a lot of the negative stereotypes that exist out there, many of which just simply don't reflect the reality of how older adults actually engage with technology. So I'm curious to know from your experiences, where have you seen either something that you were surprised by, or maybe that goes against those stereotypes in your delivery of technological services for older adults?
So I guess I'll step in that, one of the things that we saw is that there was an assumption that some of our older homeowners didn't want to be in the virtual world, that they were opting out by choice. And we realized it wasn't necessarily that they were opting out by choice. It was they might have felt intimidated. They wanted in, but needed to be invited in. And so we wanted to make sure they didn't come up to a closed door. We wanted to open the door and be going, coming in, hello, here we are, welcome, we're glad you're here. And to really kind of create that feeling in that environment. And that made a huge difference, is just making sure that we weren't building off of that premise, because we would have gone the wrong direction.
Really valuable.
I completely agree with that. And in our collaboration as well with Chase, we did a series of workshops last year. And similarly to what we see with our technology programs and what Barbara is saying, that making sure that we open the door to folks and let them know, we consistently across our programs, people finding that they're not alone, because I think it's so common for us to get inside of our heads. And we're in an interesting time actually right now, and an opportunity with COVID, and that we have this shared experience, and that we are reaching out and asking each other for help. But that's actually not the norm. Particularly, I think this population doesn't want to be a burden on their family members, their community. And so slowing down a bit to provide that support. The principle that you shared as well, Heidi, about showing people what they can expect up front and being really intentional by providing those tutorials, that has been critical to our success, and people go back to those. It's amazing, something that feels like it takes a bit more time, but people really are taking the time because they want to learn, and then they're champions and they're super users, and they're telling their friends about it, and they're telling their community about it as well.
Great. Well, anyone who has questions for our panelists and their wealth of experience to share, please drop those into the question window. And we're going to start pulling from those to hear some of the responses here. As you submit those, I'll get started with a few of the ones that have come in so far. One question was around those earlier opportunities focused on putting users in control and empowering users, and better distinguishing between what each of those mean, which I think is important. Certainly they're related, but the concept of empowering users is really about helping people affirmatively want to engage. It's about boosting demand for technology products. Many of the people we talked with felt like they just weren't going to have a choice. And so our design recommendations there relate to things like providing options for customization that shows someone they're valuable and that they are a part of this platform and who it's being designed for. It's also about learning resources. So things like the tutorials help to empower people because it helps them to build the skills. In contrast, putting users in control is more about granular control over finances and really focusing in on the financial concerns people have. So things like the ability to pause automatic transfers and being able to tightly control the execution of funds and how that's flowing. That's where control is just an incredibly important concept for people to feel comfortable using that platform. So let's launch into a few others. We had a question about trade-offs between scale and different techniques for engaging people, which I thought was interesting. So, you know, some of the more high-touch approaches in smaller communities could limit scale. Are there trade-offs of touch versus scale? And which might be kind of the better path forward?
I'm happy to start on that. There are always going to be trade-offs. And earlier when I was talking about the testing phase, one of the most important things that we talk about there is also narrowing in on who our customer is. So when we designed My Savings Jar, we were really focused on people in that 50 to 65-year-old age bracket who have a family, they are working, they have income coming in, and they're predominantly women, African-American women, being specific. And then there's always going to be other groups that are going to benefit from that solution as well. But making sure that we know who we're designing for and what they need. And I say that, it sounds like I'm not answering the question, but I say that because it can be hard sometimes to make that trade-off, because we're deliberately saying we're not going to focus initially on the 65 plus in the solution, even though we think there's an opportunity there, but that's going to come next. I think when we talk about going deep and then and scale, it's the same, wrestling with the same trade-offs. What has been important about My Savings Jar specifically is finding a way to build on both and know where our strengths are. So as an organization, AARP Foundation, our strength is on the national and on the scale. And so we are able to provide a digital tool that empowers the ongoing organizing and community development and economic development that is going on the ground. There was another question around who are the types of community organizations that we work with, and that varies. So that can be community level coaching, financial coaching organizations, nonprofits that are entrenched in community. We work with churches as well that are organizing people, and then we can provide a digital tool to capture and move some of that work forward.
Great, yeah, absolutely. I've seen some questions come in about challenges in asking users and members to engage with technology, and specifically, you know, how you have those conversations, what kind of support was provided in the short term as well as in the long term. Can either of you kind of talk about how that might have evolved over time in the support that you're providing?
Well, you know, for us, again, that camp program specifically, what we found in the beginning, we were ramped up to provide an incredibly high level of support. We, sort of talking about the concept of, are we going to serve a handful of people more or more people, slightly less? And for this camp program, we had a smallish group of people. We kept it that way so we could be intensive. So we knew at the beginning to really make it comfortable for people to step in. We figured we can't keep them if we can't get them in the door. So we needed to make sure that we had ramped up to have all kinds of different options to put people in that space in a way that they could be comfortable. And we thought perhaps through the first half, we would have to kind of keep it to that high level. But really, as people onboarded and got a little bit more comfortable, we found people were more problem solving on their own, less, I have a question, I'm just going to call and ask for the answer. Just a little bit more like, oh, let me take a minute and see if I can figure that out on my own. As people got more comfortable and more cogent in that space of how to use it, I think they got a little more free. And we found people saying they were, oh, I went to that website and found that resource and I downloaded that app. So we found people didn't need as much support and were more willing to kind of branch out on their own. And then sometimes, again, it's that cohort, building that cohort of sometimes going to other people rather than coming to us, the agency.
I think that's such a fantastic lesson, Barbara, about how to empower your users, right? And how that can be such a positive feedback loop as you're providing resources and support that enables people to get more and more comfortable over time. Such a great lesson learned. We have just a few minutes left here, so I'm going to start wrapping up. But first, I want to ask our panelists to very, very quickly share out with the group what's the one thing that someone who wants to start incorporating older users into their platform, or who is trying to design for older users in something new, what's the one first step that each of them should take? Eliza, what's your take on that?
I'm going to say two, but I'll be fast. The first one is listening. So making sure that you are hearing from your customer and not getting too stuck on one perspective, but knowing that there's a range of and a diversity of perspectives that are important to consider. And then the second is knowing what outcomes are important and that you want to be measuring. And so specifically, we have just over about 20,000 users, both on Self-Saver and My Savings Jar. And that's important, but then also what we're looking at is then the engagement over time. So if the average savings amount that people have right now is about $250, what percentage of those savers are making subsequent deposits that are actually seeing that behavior change that we want to see? That's what I would say.
That's great. Laying out what you want to track and seeing what those results are. Barbara, what do you think is the one thing that people should take as kind of a lesson learned?
Well, for us, it was the process. It was informed design. So knowing what people were looking for, knowing what they wanted. Don't be afraid to launch and learn along the way, and do course corrections as you go, because that's okay.
Iteration, absolutely key to getting it right. Absolutely.
Right.
We had so many questions that were fantastic that we didn't have a chance to answer, but we will be. We will reach out to you and make sure to address those. So if you have any last minute burning questions, drop them in. We'll follow up. We want to stay engaged. And on that note, we have a few other opportunities to kind of keep connecting with us and keep learning about this population. So download our reports for some more in-depth insights. And join us at Emerge Live, which is going to be our virtual conference this year. We're going to be releasing the 6-part video series called Financial Lives After 50, Rethinking the Golden Years. That's going to provide a really in-depth look at the financial lives of people in this segment. And I think will be just a really powerful way to better understand them and be able to design for their needs. So thank you to everyone who took the time out of their day to start thinking about design for low to moderate income older adults. I think it's so important to do that intentionally and thoughtfully, and so we're grateful for your engagement. And thank you to the fantastic panelists who are able to share their experience and insights. We're grateful for your participation. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
And take care.
It was a pleasure.